Bernd, you did represent us very well. And you also provided a very useful summary as well of issues, which saves me a job. So that's great. Good. Thank you. It means I can say the couple of things that I was going to say this morning if I'd had the time. But before I do say anything, I know I'm down there first of all as rapporteur, what I'd like to do is invite two of our colleagues here to say something, and then I will make a few comments, a few conclusions, do the rapporteur part of my role, before we end with some closing words by Muriel Wager-Fallenbuck from the Ministry of Education and Women's Affairs. So could I invite, first of all, Mukhtar Mamadov, who is the next chair of the ECML governing body, I believe, and head of Study Abroad and International Students Affairs from the Ministry of Education in Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much. Actually, I would make a slight correction. Azerbaijan would be the next chair of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, starting from 14th of May. Nothing serious. It's fine. Well, listening, first of all, it's a great honor being here. Thanks very much for the invitation to be part of those fruitful discussions, deliberations for the last 2 days. Listening from yesterday, I looked back in the history of my country, which spent about 70 years of last century as a part of Soviet Union, and I looked back into the opportunities that our citizens, our ancestors had with regard to language learning, and those opportunities were not so big. Now, when I see our kids at the age of 5 and 6 speaking 3, if not 4 languages, those times people had only option of 1, maximum 2, if they could learn Russian at those ages. So now the new ages open us new opportunities with regard to education in the modern world, which involves use of technologies, as we saw in the discussions yesterday and today, in the education and language learning as well. So now, having these opportunities today, we think that we need to make good use of those opportunities, in particular language learning, in order to develop our education. In Azerbaijan, we focus on education as one of the top priorities of the government in a short, mid, and long run. As you may know, some of you, education will be one of the priorities of our chairmanship within the Council of Europe. If to name a partnership with other stakeholders, in our cooperation with the European Union for 2014-2017, education is chosen as one of the 3 top priorities for this multi-annual period. Now, what we do in my country with regard to development of Azerbaijan, we name it under the strategy of turning black gold, which is our oil and gas resources, into human capital. And we perceive education as one of the major instruments into gaining and developing this human capital. That's why yesterday there have been some thoughts that money usually is being considered as the main reason when something is not going right with the education, or you don't have enough reforms, development, everybody talks about scarcity of money. We try not to do this, invest as much as we can, because we believe that this is the biggest investment into our future. Investment into education, investment into development of youth, and perceiving education, as Mr. Bergen said, in a way producing our true citizens with democratic values who will bring our country into next level of development. We think there cannot be any better field of investment of our resources than education. And language training, language education is the biggest part of it. I'm proudly able to say that Azerbaijan environment can be considered as one of the multilingual environments. where our school kids are able to speak 3 to 4 languages already before graduating their secondary education, and afterwards they are free and have opportunities to continue with other languages. Although in our case as well, English is one of the top preferences among the youngsters to learn among the foreign languages, was due to requirements of the labor market in our country, which has a lot of integration with the foreign businesses and also foreign business representation in Azerbaijan, and with regard to education abroad, study abroad. But we're also looking into domains how to encourage youngsters to learn other languages as well, since we perceive the more language our citizens can learn, the better it will be to communicate with other countries, with our partners. And speaking more languages, besides integrating with other partners, it also brings to fruitful dialogue and preventing any possible crisis, conflicts in future. As a country which currently suffers from it, we understand the essence of dialogue among the countries, among the people, among youngsters in particular, as much as we can. We support the idea of theory plus practice in education, particularly in language education as well, since we look into the matter whether languages which are learned at school, at the universities, are if the students have enough opportunities, environment to practice those languages. Since it's not a secret that if you learn a language but don't practice it, you will, well, I have experienced this myself some years ago, you will forget it after some period. That's why we try to bring the environment where to show them, not to tell them, but to show them the right way of choosing which language to learn with the added value of this language, as well as to create the opportunity for them to practice it. As Mr. Rapporteur mentioned, I'm heading the unit which is responsible for study abroad. Now, in a period when we are trying to develop our higher education system, which is not an easy task and will take a lot of resources and time, as a short to mid-term solution, we are investing vast resources into education of our youth abroad in the United States, Canada, Europe, Asia. This is about higher education, bachelor, master's, PhD, and so on. And this dimension is also very important for learning more languages. They know some languages to a certain extent after living and studying in those foreign countries, which are quite a lot, over 30 countries. They are able to advance on their core foreign language, plus to get one or more during those studies abroad. And when they get back and work in Azerbaijan, doesn't matter which field, public sector, private sector, some of them even teach back in local universities, they're able to share their experiences, their skills, including the language, with the other students, which we consider as a big asset and big investment return in our education system. Recently, we have adopted a strategy on development of education in Azerbaijan, which will look at least in the period of 5 years, covering all dimensions of education, where application of new technologies in education is one of the priorities, since we understand that in a modern world, without using the information technologies, you cannot succeed in any field, including in education. And yesterday's presentations with regard to applications of smartphones, tablets at school education, and how the youngsters perceive these new technologies showed that these IT know-how, IT developments have a big important role in defining the new strategy for our education system. And while listening to the previous speakers, most of the discussion with regard to language education was focused on school, at some point to university level, but we do not want to limit only to those levels with regard to language education, but go even beyond to adult education as well, since during the lifelong learning, we want give the kids at schools and universities all those skills that will make it easier for them to learn new languages, as well as for elder people who were not as lucky as their children, as their maybe grandchildren even, to learn that much of languages, and who require learning additional languages either to work or any other purposes. So this portion, although it's difficult to go all in at once, but still this portion is also an important priority for us. And lastly, I will not take too much of your time. I know that lunch is coming soon, and everybody is probably waiting for the lunch, and some, including myself, have trains or planes to catch. I would like to mention that it was in our chairmanship of the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers, we will be holding an event in Baku on 20th, 21st of May under democratic citizenship and human rights education, which will be focused on children in vulnerable situations. And we hope to bring out a lot of multidimensional issues during this event, and looking forward to seeing some of you or representatives of your countries, and to start our contribution into this sensitive topic.
Many thanks, Mukhtar, and apologies for my error. Take it as a subtle invitation to Azerbaijan to become a member of the ECML. I now want to passer la parole, I've forgotten how you say that in English now, to Irena Mashkova, who is chair of ECML governing body. Thank you.
Thank you. It's all right. My role before the final official closing words provided by the Austrian Federal Ministry of Education and Women's Affairs, I like the title, is just to say thank you. Thank you to the contributors to this conference, to all the presenters. Thank you to the audience. Thank you all for being committed to the common and not very easy task, to be committed to look for, explore, and hopefully find ways towards successful learning. Learning which is mostly done through languages, by means of languages. And it's not a coincidence that the current title of our ECML program is Learning Through Languages, and we have heard a lot about that. In particular, I would like to say thanks to the Federal Ministry of Education and Women's Affairs for initiating the whole idea of this conference in GRAZ. To the ECML, the Secretariat, they have had a lot to do for this organization. They did splendid work for organizing the conference. They were not alone in that. They have been supported by the Verein, the Austrian Federation, that managed to coordinate all the organizational affairs. Thanks to all the governing board members, my colleagues, thanks to members of the Professional Network Forum, the partners of DCML, for bringing so much important input into the conference and taking part in the sessions, active part. Thanks to the staff of Old University for providing this magnificent building and the support for this conference. And big thanks for the excellent, as always, work of the interpreters. Thank you.
Thank you, Irena. I'd like to just say a few words now, please, if you bear with me, in my rapporteur role. Obviously, I'm not going to repeat everything that's been said. I would like to say that the Professional Network Forum is meeting this afternoon. We'll be discussing the ECML's next programme, and clearly we have a lot of food for thought to inform that discussion. But I'd like to reflect really on something which actually Irena just picked up too. Two themes which will underpin any projects, and they're the themes of learning and teaching, and perhaps visions of learning and visions of teaching. And I'd like to say just a few words about each of those. First of all, learning. We've heard a lot of things about learning, starting with Henry talking about accumulation of knowledge as a traditional form of learning. But we've also we've had a lot of discussions and presentations around the idea that learning is not about consumption, it's not about consuming knowledge, but actually learners producing knowledge, learners as producers of knowledge, active in their learning, learning by doing. We've had learning by teaching. We heard from Ishli about pupils teaching the teachers how to use the technology. We've heard pupils in the video talking about creating learning resources, the Spanish vocabulary. So learners as teachers, the two are intertwined. There's a lot that we've been talking about which are about learner autonomy. And learner autonomy, of course, is a core concept of the Council of Europe. In its present form, and there's a huge amount of research into learner autonomy, was triggered by work at the Council of Europe. But I'd also like to suggest that we revisit some traditional theories of learning. Basic learning theories, constructivism, social constructivism, talking about learners producing knowledge, revisiting Piaget, Vygotsky, Brunner, and constructionism, a development of constructivism. Seymour Papert talked a lot about that, and that's about learners building, learners tinkering, trying ideas out, being creative, presenting their ideas for public debate. There's been a lot of work done into, for example, online portfolios, and how that is about constructing, but through constructionism, knowledge and understanding. How do we bring these into our projects? And then the other side of the coin, we talk in the field of learner autonomy that learner autonomy and teacher autonomy are two sides of the same coin, and it's very difficult to have one without the other. Teacher competencies for the 21st century. I'd like to say something finally about teacher autonomy. And teacher autonomy for me is about teachers taking responsibility for their own learning. It's not about teachers being autonomous to do whatever they like. It's not about freedom, but actually having that responsibility and understanding to be able to move things forward. Critical reflection is central to that. Questioning own assumptions. Understanding their position, critiquing their position, justifying the position, developing a vision, recognizing constraints which are external, and we've heard a lot about constraints of space, assessment, curricula, time, money. Turid Trebby, a colleague of mine in Norway, talks about internal constraints. The internal constraints are our beliefs about how things are, and again, a theme that's cropped up. How do teachers acknowledge and recognize and critically reflect on their internal constraints? How will this inform projects in ECML? How do we get teachers to sort of follow constructionist approaches to their own learning? Finding the spaces for maneuver, I've called it, in terms of teacher autonomy, knowing where the problems are, but finding ways through rather than giving up, becoming disaffected, disempowered. How can teachers empower themselves to move towards their vision of education? Finding the spaces, step by step, but moving towards something which they can justify. And I think that being able to do that is something which learners and teachers need to do, because it's closely linked to concepts such as resilience, flexibility, openness to new ideas, willingness to try things out, but accompanied by criticality and critical reflection. So, back to the question of what is quality education? What are competencies, language competencies, learning competencies for the 21st century? I think it's partly related to these constraints, these challenges. The challenges are part of the vision. There are always challenges, the challenges of change. So actually preparing learners to deal with challenges and teachers to deal with challenges in a principled way and thought through way, perhaps that is the vision. On a completely different note, before the very closing words come from Muriel, I need to say something about the fact that there are still places available on the cultural programme. Just a change of note. And the bus tour in and around Graz and Schlossberg, highly recommended. Please go to the desk in the lunch break if you're interested. Okay? So we move from... yeah. Okay. I'd just like to say thank you, because I won't say anything more, because I really am going to ask Muriel to say the closing words. But thank you, everyone, for your participation. Thank you to ECML. Thanks to all of the people involved in this, supporting it. And they've all been thanked. I won't reiterate them all, but many, many thanks. We look forward to another languages conference, perhaps in Azerbaijan at some point. And I'd like to now invite Muriel Waage-Fallenberg from the Austrian Federal Ministry of Education and Women's Affairs to...
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, im Namen des Bundesministeriums für Bildung und Frauen möchte ich mich sehr herzlich dafür bedanken, dass Sie sich in den letzten beiden Tagen die Zeit genommen haben, in die heimliche Sprachenhauptstadt Österreichs nach Graz zu kommen. Die große Zahl an hochrangigen Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmern aus über 40 Ländern zeigt, dass das Thema der Konferenz Bildungsqualität und Sprachenkompetenz für die Gesellschaft im 21. Jahrhundert, obwohl natürlich gerade im Kontext des Europarates und des ECML kein neues, so doch ein brandaktuelles ist. Österreich ist, so wie viele andere Länder, auch in der Schule ein dezidiert mehrsprachiges Land geworden. Wir haben das schon gehört. 24% der Schülerinnen und Schüler in der Pflichtschule haben in Österreich eine andere Erstsprache als Deutsch. In Wien sind es fast 60%. Wir stehen nun in Österreich, und das trifft, wie gesagt, auf viele andere Länder auch zu, vor der Herausforderung sicherzustellen, dass alle Schülerinnen und Schüler die Unterrichtssprache, in unserem Fall Deutsch, angemessen beherrschen, und zwar nicht nur in ihrer alltagssprachlichen, sondern auch in ihrer bildungssprachlichen Variante, sodass sie sowohl in der Schule, aber auch später im Berufsleben voll handlungsfähig sind und ihre Rechte als Bürgerinnen und Bürger wahrnehmen können. Die Unterrichtssprache allein ist aber nicht genug, denn wir leben in einer pluralistischen, von Globalisierung geprägten Wissens- und Informationsgesellschaft, in der Mehrsprachigkeit von ganz zentraler Bedeutung ist. Mehrsprachigkeit, die über Lebenschancen und über Berufschancen entscheiden kann. Daher setzen wir in Österreich, so wie viele andere Länder auch, Maßnahmen, um einerseits die Fremdsprachenkenntnisse auf hohem Niveau entwickeln zu können und andererseits aber auch, um die Herkunftssprachen von Kindern mit Migrationshintergrund fördern zu können. Sektionschef Huber hat schon gesagt, dass wir in Österreich sogenannten muttersprachlichen Unterricht in über 20 Sprachen anbieten. Diese Situation der Mehrsprachigkeit bietet Österreich viele Chancen, stellt unser Land aber auch vor komplexe Herausforderungen. Um die Chancen noch besser nützen und den Herausforderungen kompetenter und erfolgreicher begegnen zu können, braucht es auch, und zwar ganz, ganz dringend, interdisziplinären und internationalen Austausch von Expertise, Erfahrungen und Modellen. Also genau das, was diese Konferenz und damit Sie alle hier gestern und heute geleistet haben. Herzlichen Dank an dieser Stelle an all jene, die im Auftrag des Bildungsministeriums diese Konferenz mit viel Expertise und hohem Engagement vorbereitet und durchgeführt haben. Stellvertretend für das ECML möchte ich ganz herzlich Sarah Breslin danken und stellvertretend für den Verein EFSZ ebenso herzlich Ursula Newby. Mir bleibt jetzt nur noch Ihnen auch ganz persönlich entweder noch ein schönes Wochenende in Graz oder aber eine gute und sichere Heimreise zu wünschen. Vielen herzlichen Dank.